Assalamu alaikum rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hope you're doing fantastic. We're continuing our reading of Niccolo Machiavelli's The Prince and Other Writings. It's a great book. We are in a new chapter, chapter 9, on the civil principality. The reason why I like reading this book is because you take a break so that you don't get burnt out studying the same thing over and over, and you're actually able to keep your enthusiasm and your momentum for studying alive. And so diversifying what you read helps you to actually retain what you've learned, and is a secret to how so many high performing people who study a lot and consistently every single day are able to not get burnt out and bored. And so I highly recommend you try that strategy. So go ahead and listen to this as you're driving, you're on the train, you are relaxing, putting your feet up, washing the dishes, cleaning the bathroom, you name it. Let's begin. But coming to the other alternative, when a private citizen becomes prince of his native city. Okay, so a private citizen becoming a prince, not through wickedness or some other intolerable violence, but by the favor of his fellow citizens. This may be called a civil principality, since its acquisition does not necessarily depend either entirely on ability, virtue, or entirely on fortune, but rather on cleverness assisted by fortune. Now that's interesting. So, a civil principality is when when a private citizen has become the prince of his native city, and he didn't do it through wickedness or violence, and instead had a combination of cleverness assisted by fortune. I say that one ascends to that position either through the favor of the people, so through the favor of the people, or through the favor of the nobility. So you got a route of the nobility or the people. For in every city these two different humors are found, and this arises from the fact that the people desire not to be commanded or oppressed by the great, while the great desire to command and oppress the people. Well, ain't that the truth? That is like a tale as old as time, where people, they don't want to be oppressed and overly commanded by the ruling class, but the ruling class desires to have some influence on what the people do. And from these two opposed appetites, I like how he says that, opposed appetites, there arises in cities one of three effects: either princely rule, or liberty, or license. Okay, so let's look at that. Princely rule, then we have liberty, and then we have license. Now he's going to go in here for princely rule. Princely rule is created either by the people or by the nobility, depending on which one of these parties has the opportunity to create it. Okay, so who holds the power to create princely rule will either reside in the hands of the people or the nobles, aka aristocracy. For when the nobility see that they cannot resist the people, they start directing their support toward one of their own and make him prince, so that under his protective shade, they can satisfy their appetite. The people also, seeing that they cannot resist the nobility, start giving their support to one of their own and make him prince, in order to be defended by his authority. Now that's interesting. Okay, we got two. Notice this. Okay, this is very interesting. So if you choose, the aristocracy will choose people who put them in a protective shade. The people will choose someone who will defend them by his authority. Very interesting thing that looks there. The people defended by his authority, who they choose, and the aristocracy looks for a protective shade so that heat ain't rising on them. He who attains princely rule with the help of the great will maintain his position with greater difficulty than he who becomes prince with the help of the people. Now that's interesting, because you think it would be the opposite, that money would help you to hold it. But if the people really dislike you, you're going to have a problem. That's why the power of propaganda is so high. A lot of people don't like Biden, but we're not allowed to post about him, so people aren't really seeing it, right? Whereas the people loved Trump, many of them, and also hated him as well, but they allowed the people to mock him and meme him, but they are very strict with how much they'll allow you to mock Biden, when Biden is not as loved as Trump was. Not at all. And anyone with 2 brain cells can see who has a real following, right? Populism. Trump has the populist vote. Biden has the establishment, globalist vote. Because he finds himself to be prince amidst many who think themselves his equals. And for this reason, he is unable to command and manage them to his liking. That's interesting. So, if you are attained princely rule by the greats, it's going to be hard to keep them in check, because they're going to see him as their equals. So they're not necessarily going to bow to his dominion and authority as easy. That's quite interesting. But he who attains princely rule through the favor of the people finds himself there alone, and has no one or very few around him who are not ready to obey him. So notice this. If you choose the nobles, they're not as ready to obey you. But if you choose the people, they're more ready to obey you. They chose you to have the authority and to use that authority to defend them. Whereas the elites are seeing you as a protective shade, but you have a function, and they're not intimidated necessarily by you because they have wealth as well. They have connections. They'll move your chess piece out of the way while they try to plot for a new chess piece. Besides this, one cannot satisfy the great with honor and without injuring others, but one can surely do so with the people. That's interesting. That's a very unique point. Because the aim of the people is more honorable than that of the nobility. That's really kind of him to say. The aim of the people is more honorable than nobility. So he's saying the nobles have different aims. Since the latter, the elites, desire to oppress others, while the former desire not to be oppressed. So that's why he's saying the people have better aims that are more honorable than the nobility class, because they just don't want to be oppressed, whereas the elites seek to oppress. And I think if you look at America, don't know about the world, but you can definitely see how they pass these tax laws. They over-regulate how many chickens you can have, who can have chickens, who can't. They're constantly finding ways so that you are less free, and they're more all up in your business, stifling your growth. They're more protective of their club of corruption. Whereas the people are like, no, just leave me alone. I want to have my liberty. Moreover, a prince can never make himself secure against a hostile people, because there are too many of them. Now that's interesting. A leader, here he's saying prince, but we could say a governor, a mayor. If the people are hostile towards you, you ain't never going to be safe. That's a very important thing. That is one reason why the leftists want to take away the Second Amendment so much. And there will be liberals who tell you, no, we're just doing incremental bans here, a little ban there. But what they do is their strategy is piece by piece banning. They know that if they just do an outright quick ban, it'll be so it'll make people snap with fear. But if they, one state, they get someone to ban in this county and in that county, and people are busy working, piece by piece, before you know it, we're gonna have somebody like Justin Trudeau who wanted to ban handguns, which is ridiculous. Meanwhile, the border's open, and illegal weapons are smuggled all the time. So the good people don't have a right to defend themselves. The criminals will always have access to guns. And the same people who want to strip us of our gun rights want to defund the police departments. Which means less people to respond to you, and unarmed, useless social workers trying to rationalize what's going on with a meth head who's hallucinating and trying to stab people, running around naked. It's not going to work, you know? So if you think about it, a ruler who has to rule an armed population is going to treat that population quite differently. Because if they turn hostile, they're going to put you in check, which helps protect everybody. But through the constant censorship of pro-gun advocates, pro-gun educational material, that makes people not know the other side of the equation, and then they cleverly amplify thug music that shows poor usage of firearms, not educational, and plays upon the anger of individuals, which gets them to act in reckless ways, which then they take those news stories, weaponize it, and then try to push through their legislation that way based upon the scenario they artificially created. So this little nugget here by Machiavelli, talking about how a prince can never really make himself safe if the people are hostile, is quite true, because there's many of them. So someone who has evil in their heart towards the people, first thing they want to do is take away the people's right to defend themselves, while arming their loyal military to themselves and calling the military of anyone who would support an opposition to them, a coup to them. It's quite interesting. Instead of making the military neutral, they turn it into a private weapon, so that that military can then protect them from the people who are now unarmed and can't fight back. My own Democrat liberal professor, she started mocking people in the class, saying, "You think your little weapons can protect you from the military? Ho 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 ho." And she's saying that as Biden was in power, but she wouldn't say that if it was someone on the right who had the military loyal to them. Then she'd be screaming about fascism. So when it's them in power, they love it, but then they don't want you to have gun rights. And then she demonizes gun rights. And so you can see how it's like, what's going on here? It doesn't make sense. But I really like this line here he had for us, because it makes us think. Against the great he can secure himself. So here he contends that he can secure himself against the nobles, because they are few. Interesting. Now that's interesting. Okay, so we're getting into numbers here. But I'd also argue that the wealthy have the money to hire assassins, to plot you, like against you. But if you can't walk down the street without someone wanting to attack you, you have a problem. But the corrupt politicians of today, like Cori Bush, if you look it up, she champions defund the police, abolish prison. She's a very horrible human being. And she spent $400,000 on private security, paid for by the taxpayers. So she wears fancy jewelry, right? She's leeching off of the poor to fund her lavish lifestyle, right? She has private security to keep her safe so she can walk down the street without someone throwing some poo at her or whatever. But the people don't have a right to defend themselves against the rampant gang problem. So she wants to take away gun rights and defund police, by her own words, and has private security. So it just kind of goes to show you how there's so many dynamics to how a leader can stay in power. Because the leaders today, they have private security so that they can't be bothered by the peasants. You know, they don't want to be bothered by us. They want to take our money, fly on private jets, tell us we can't have an air conditioner, tell us we can't eat steak. They live it up, burning, massive amounts of fuel on private jets, then demonizing you because you can't afford gas. So they isolate themselves from us, the people, as much as possible. Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, for example, he was walking down the street, people started screaming at him, cursing at him. They really don't like him. But he has the upper class backing him, while the common people don't like him. But he stopped walking around. I used to see him, now, because he can see that how he's running the state, the people are becoming hostile. It is quite interesting. Very, very interesting, I must say. The worst that a prince can expect from a hostile people is to be abandoned by them. But from hostile noblemen, he has to fear not only being abandoned, but also their active opposition, so abandonment. Because having more foresight and more cunning, the people always have time to save themselves and to seek favors from those whom they expect to win. The prince is moreover obliged to live always with the same people. But he can easily do without the same noblemen, being able to make and to unmake them every day. Oh, that's a great point. So the people are sort of putting their hat in the ring to be protected, right? But the noblemen can come and go because he can make them noble or not through his appointments or resignments. Very interesting, right? He can appoint and dispose because he is in a position of authority. And to take away and restore the reputation as he pleases. This is quite true. And that's one reason why princes started to become so unstable. But at the same time, politicians do that today. Nepotism, it's called. They hire their connection ones. Who's going to obey, who's going to toe the line. Not necessarily who's most qualified. Who checks these certain boxes. It's very dirty now. We don't really have great leaders anymore. The fall of Rome, as they say. Quite interesting section, I must say. He's always a thought-provoking writer, someone who I really admire, and you hear him talked about by people, and then when you ask people, have you actually read his works, they say, no, I haven't actually read it. So you can't really trust people who speak about books they've not fully read, and people who talk about classes, scholars, books, subjects that they don't even know of, besides a few YouTube videos or maybe 20 pages out of a book. You just should back away from them and seek people who take the time, have the diligence, and actually do the hard work and study it, and then above that also comprehend it and be able to engage in a conversation with you about that material. So I hope you really enjoyed this, and have a great day.